Thanks to everyone that's watched parts 1 to 8. I will finish this last part summarising everything and touching on some more basic points and making a few more references to other archaeologists, linguists and historians who has basically spoken against this mainstream Bantu migration lie. So in summary, the Masonic European family's quest to validating their superiority was done by trying to find God. They believe the origin of spoken words will assist them in trying to find God. This came about during secrets discovered during their travels across the Atlantic and Indian Ocean, which is where the main concept of treasure maps and secret locations on maps and areas around the world came from. Their scientific equations to finding God led them in search for materialistic and spiritual experiences which they felt belonged to them. And we must remember these ideas developed from their Age of Enlightenment movements. Their allies from the transatlantic slave trade, basically the North Africans, Northeast Africans, East Africans, Sultan Arabs, the Sahel Arabs, the Nigerian House of Fulani groups basically, were the same allies who was guiding them in their quest, which led them to South Africa, where they first studied the Zulu language, in order for them to get closer to the root of what they was in search for. Studying the language of the Zulu led them closer to what they was in search for, heading towards Central Africa. It was at this point they understood some type of coding within our language that they kept to themselves. As they reached the southern end of Central Africa, which was basically the south of Democratic Republic of Congo, they met one of their Sultan allies named Misiri in southeastern regions of Congo, who basically reached Central Africa before them, and he basically corrupted the bloodline of the indigenous people in that region before the Europeans were able to. Misiri basically helped the Masonic Europeans locate the people and land spots that they were basically looking for. Therefore, they assigned the first archaic Bantu language to Misiri and his Sultan Arab traders, who basically occupied this region of southeast regions of Democratic Republic of Congo today. And to cut a long story short, the Masonic Europeans and Misiri fell out because Misiri wouldn't allow them to control the region and he stopped helping them. The Europeans tried to make Misiri sign a treaty allowing them to infiltrate, but they eventually killed him anyway and went beyond the interiors of Central Africa, killing their ex-Sultan Swahili Arab allies in the process. And this also had to do with the Congo-Arab War as well, just so you're aware. And just remember, today's current archaic Bantu is considered to be the Nigerian Cameroon regions, and at this point it was considered to be the southeastern regions of Democratic Republic of Congo today. That's why in part 2 I entitled it Accidental Honesty, as they attempted to classify Swahili to be the equivalent of Zone A in southeast DRC Congo today, so they can attribute the language group to their Sultan allies at the time. However, they forgot the Central African areas they invaded is where the archaic Bantu words came from, which was incorporated in into the Arab Swahili, hence why it was accidental honesty. So moving on now, as they was no longer trusting their Sultan Arabs, they assigned the archaic Bantu tongue to their allies all the way in Nigeria, who they considered more trustworthy than their Sultan Arabs at the time. They then invaded the interiors of Congo with their Nigerian allies, including other West African allies of theirs from places like Togo, Ghana, Sierra Leone and Senegal, and this invasion began the depopulation process of millions of indigenous Congolese people. After the successful depopulation of indigenous Congolese, words like Congo was basically assigned to groups in Nigeria who are not Congolese. Hence why you hear the term Benue Congo, despite groups that have been categorized under this name having no Congolese roots whatsoever. They also began to assign Congolese land spots to their specific Nilotic Ethiopian descent allies, who they were referring to as Hamites at the time. This was part of the ethnic distortion process. Also, in order to make their flawed Proto-Bantu look like it's situated in Cameroon-Nigeria regions, they promoted the term Sawa Bantu and ensured their Douala Cameroon allies absorbed all the smaller groups who came from the interiors of Central Africa, such as the Mbok people or the Cameroonian Mongo people and the Gundu people, etc., etc. They made these artificial Sawa Bantu groups to be interchangeable with the word Douala, so you don't know who they are. Notice I said the word Douala. I didn't say Douala people, I said the word Douala, so that it's interchangeable with the word Sawa Bantu. So moving on, in order to maintain secrecy on their findings via language and the Bible, they believed distorting the origins and identity of indigenous Congolese Central Africans was important. Before killing Misiri, they learned from Misiri that they can never allow the indigenous Central African Congolese people to manage or control their own land or discover or understand their roots, like the Europeans believed to have understood their roots via language. This gave them the idea of attempting to control or depopulate all indigenous Congolese people and anybody that is genetically like Congolese people in other parts of Africa or in other parts of the world, and this is why it's important for them to have indigenous Central Africans controlled either by their allies or having their history basically written in the direction of their allies. This is why they called their East African and Northeast African allies the Hamitic father of the dark races, and they also made their Nigerian allies the father of our tongue or the father of our languages. They understood contradictions will follow, hence why they set up many African institutions full of masons, intelligence services and professional spies to continuously go into the Congo to map out and create artificial or false theories about our origin which sound plausible. Those who created the best plausible sounding lies in regards to the origins of the Congolese people were awarded and or promoted above others. Those that accidentally told the truth or attempted to tell the truth were silenced. This is why these African institutions in Europe was funded by the British and Belgian monarchies, suppressing or disregarding African oral history concerning migrations from Uganda was basically part of this process. As we get closer to modern times, propaganda, social engineering and misinformation about indigenous Congolese people became a priority if they basically wished to control the people and the lands for the long term. Promoting the term pygmy and deceitful haplogroup DNA assignments was part of the ethnic distortion against indigenous Congolese people. The Europeans themselves displaced millions of hunter-gatherer groups who began to adapt to the savanna environments, growing taller. Therefore, they began to promote a scientific culture inferring to heritage via haplogroups and regional migration theories. This way, they can assign a story about growth to specific haplogroups they choose, because the average consumer and the culture in the mainstream academia would abide by these theories anyway without questioning anything. Identifying a common genetic trait is a reality. However, the consumer or the person that doesn't question mainstream narratives doesn't realize attaching prehistoric stories to haplogroup assignments doesn't equal a fact. A Ugandan brother named Samwiri Luanga Lunyigo an anthropologist who some of you may have not heard of. He basically brilliantly argued all these European linguists and anthropologists' Bantu theories was flawed, as they was just building on Joseph Greenberg's works. But they were not speculating or arguing against the origin of the so-called Bantu coming from Nigeria, which is why the theories have been endless, to the point there seems to be like a market for this study within the academic world. So long as Nigeria is not disputed as the origins of the so-called Bantu, then the arguments about the dispersal and migration routes and the language evolution will be endless, with multiple contradictions and flaws, but the devils would obviously rather keep it that way. Also, the brother Luanga Lunyigo made it clear this migration theory came about via their obsession with our origins, which is why they created the Hermetic hypothesis, solely because of what they guessed to be our origins made them extremely upset. And he said the so-called Bantu origin was anywhere between Uganda, the Great Lake regions, and Zaire, also known as Democratic Republic of Congo today, and there was no mass migration from Nigeria into Central Africa. And remember, this was in 1976, and it's not me that's saying this, it's a brother from Uganda who's an actual anthropologist. I will now read in summary some broken down quotes from a dedicated historian named Manfred Eghert, who was involved in major archaeological projects in Congo forests and field research in Cameroon. Also, to his advantage, he studied ethnology, so he had more than an intermediate understanding on the roles genetic plays with phenotypes, characteristics, and culture of different ethnic groups. So let me go ahead. The archaeological evidence in Congo is extremely spotty and not even enough to reflect a mass migration into the Congo forest. Genetic variation along with linguistic cultural studies in Africa hasn't been sufficiently studied yet, and today's geneticists seem to overestimate the historical potential of their field when it comes to the so-called Bantu. And this is me speaking now. This supports my statements about them applying fictional stories to genetic groups so they can maintain their Bantu migration lie. And brilliantly, he understood, I quote, "There's a problem with the so-called Bantu genetic data analysed. It is important to know which ethnic group the DNA samples were taken from." Now, this is me speaking. Do you remember in part 5 I was telling you how they sampled isolated groups and defined the DNA as Bantu on purpose? That's what he's basically noticed too. For example, they will sample a group in Kenya, like the Luya group. They will coin that DNA as Bantu, and then they will represent it as the whole of Central Africa. Remember in part 7 when I was telling you that they want to make Lendu and Hema interchangeable, the same way they're trying to make Tutsi and Hutu interchangeable, Sawa Bantu and Douala interchangeable, Twa and semi-nomadic interchangeable, and you can get the pattern. That's what they want to do. For example, Swahili and Bantu interchangeable. It's equivalent to me sampling a Fulani from the far northern regions of Nigeria and naming that DNA Nigerian DNA. So let me continue. These definitions, such as Bantu, are vague from an anthropological and linguistic point of view. Even more questionable is the clear genetic variability amongst the so-called Bantu themselves, let alone the variability amongst the linguistic groups. So this is me speaking now. Here he's basically highlighting two genetically distinct people are being categorized as Bantu. So let me continue. I quote, "There are no genes for language. Remember that when you're using terms like Niger Congo or Benue Congo to infer to genetics." I didn't say it, he did. He said there are no genes for language. He goes on to expose the fact there has been lack of DNA studies carried out in the interiors of DRC Congo all the way down to South Africa, which you won't hear about. He also highlights what these linguists on the Bantu expansion are basically doing is referring to conclusions from other disciplines such as archaeological theories or agricultural theories to basically substantiate their linguistic theory, which many of you won't realize, and these theories are not scientific facts. Just to briefly touch on the genetic side of things, I wanted to show you other methods that they are taking to distort Congolese identity or Central African identity as a whole. You can watch a video that I made entitled The Best DNA Company for Central African DNA, where I'll go into more detail in what I'm going to explain now. So basically, in summary, in 2018, their categories for Central Africa was only Cameroon, Congo and Southeastern Bantu. And they also had African South Central hunter-gatherers. But what the average consumer didn't know is that African South Central hunter-gatherer was just basically a marker that is found in Mbuti, Bayaka, and Khoisan groups. Basically, when I say Mbuti and Bayaka, I'm talking about so-called pygmy groups. And if you watch part 3, you would know that this marker can be found in any so-called Bantu group. But what they've done is presented this category to represent a so-called pygmy race. And we should know by now the Mbuti and the Bayaka are genetically distinct from one another, and the Mbuti and Bayaka are very far in distance from the Khoisan groups genetically. And following their update in 2018, they removed the category African South Central hunter-gatherers and they removed the category Southeastern Bantu, and they made it one broad category, which is Cameroon, Congo and Southern Bantu peoples, which still gives an idea, but it basically distorts which regional areas this DNA is actually coming from. To also support my point, they created a new category called Southern and Eastern hunter-gatherers, which is basically specifically Khoi and San groups. If you put 2 and 2 together, it would be easier to differentiate between Khoi San groups in comparison to South African Nguni groups, as it will be extremely difficult to differentiate between Mbuti and Bayaka groups who grow small and tall in comparison to their so-called Bantu farming neighbours. Does that make sense? Now with this company 23andMe, what they did for their Central African category is label it Congolese and Southern Eastern African deceitfully, so that they can incorporate non-indigenous Central African groups into this category and infer to a Bantu expansion. They also have a so-called hunter-gatherer marker like ancestral DNA used to have. Theirs is called African hunter-gatherer, and they deceitfully present this category like it's a race. As you should know by now, Mbuti, Bayaka and Khoisan isn't one race, and they are all genetically distinct from one another. So when people get results from these hunter-gatherer groups, you don't know which isolated group that they are basically using. And there's no way of telling whether this percentage is for Mbuti, Bayaka or Khoisan when it appears on your results. And you need to remember it's just a marker which can be found in so-called Bantu groups as well. And they are not exactly sampling the DNA of the multiple so-called pygmy groups. It's just a marker that is found within these groups, and they've grouped it together with Khoisan to make it appear like a race, which is deceitful and the average consumer won't know. And this is part of distorting the identity, because what would happen is the markers that are actually found in the so-called pygmy groups that they are shown to you on TV are now incorporated into these categories such as Angolan and Congolese, or with ancestral DNA it would be incorporated into Cameroon, Congo and Southern Bantu peoples. Also, if you watch part 3, you should know by now there are multiple other hunter-gatherer groups, not just Bayaka and Mbuti. And also don't forget, multiple so-called pygmy groups and pygmoid groups have been classified as Bantu now, and they may be incorporated into these categories such as Angola and Congolese on 23andMe, or Cameroon, Congo and Southern Bantu peoples on ancestral DNA. Also, the reality is there are barely any Central African DNA represented in these modern day reference panels on these DNA companies. They are usually just marginalized to coastal groups like Bakongo people in Angola and Republic of Congo and the coast area by Democratic Republic of Congo, and sometimes they use Ovambo in Angola. Apart from that, you will not have any transparency in regards to the 200 plus ethnic groups in the interiors of Democratic Republic of Congo. There was one company that basically accidentally exposed the issue with Central African DNA. It was a company called Living DNA. However, I'm just showing you this so that you can understand that all this is to do with distorting Central African DNA and maintaining the Bantu expansion line. Now, I just want us to think about some basic things. Have we actually ever thought about these environments where the so-called forest Bantu-speaking groups live? Have we ever thought about the actual environment within itself in comparison to a migration taking place. Do we understand that when we look at these migration maps, they are basically showing us blank maps with arrows showing a direction of a migration, only to link it with their linguistic classifications? Are we remembering that when we're looking at these maps? Let's not forget they said we were agricultural farmers, therefore we went through those forests with our tools, seeds and iron technology to filter through those dense forests with no archaeological finds to reference mass deaths or mass migration paths, nothing at all. Do you know how much rivers they would have had to cross? Do you know how dangerous the rivers are in Congo alone? How did they cross these rivers? Did they make thousands of boats? Let's not even go that far. Let's go back to the rich forest areas in Cameroon. Have we looked at the satellite map yet? The more dark the green areas you see here is the more dense the forest areas are. The common directional route from the Cameroon region is basically impossible, especially with thousands or millions of people. That directional route from Cameroon is basically a suicidal route. And you need to remember we're speaking about a people that are yet to adapt to the forest, as they was agricultural farmers. There is, however, ridiculous theories on how they got through the Cameroon region, but they're not promoted because they would actually look dumb. I found one which they would deem plausible, which inevitably had contradictions anyway. Their explanation, aka theory, is that they went around the dense forest regions in Cameroon Zone A to arrive in the Gabon region Zone B. Remember, the Europeans have cut down large amounts of the forest. Who is to say that this route was not as dense 2,000 to 5,000 years ago? And even with this route, there are no archaeological finds to support a mass migration from Cameroon region A to Gabon region B. Not only that, these people that managed to break through these forests full of dangerous animals that they are yet to familiarize with did not even leave not one trace of knock sculptures or knock type of art in the process. And today they seem to have forgotten how to make art related to knot culture, but they know how to make pottery just like the Bantu people in the Great Lake regions. So let's say thousands or millions of people did migrate from Cameroon Zone A to Gabon Zone B. Let's look at this map again and identify how on earth they got through into the interiors of Congo via these death routes. Remember, these are groups of farmers and agriculturalists who were not familiar with the forest. They were not hunter-gatherers, they were farmers. So let's zoom into these Congo regions just so that we try to get a clearer picture of what we are agreeing to, if this was the case. Can you see how darker it gets once you reach these interiors? These regions here that I'm showing you is the language connection creating Zone C from Zone B in Gabon. Just look at the density of these forests. Are we basically agreeing that thousands or millions of agricultural farmers bulldoze their ways through these suicide routes? And another thing to notice as well, even up to Cameroon, all the major cities, they're not even by the dense areas of the forest. It's just small isolated areas which are closer to the forest, and even they are not basically near the national parks. And also, just to make clear, the roads don't run directly through the forest. They are like in zigzag lines. And this is modern times. The longest, most consistent roads are mainly near the coastline areas. Even in the 19th century, do you know how many of Queen Victoria and King Leopold's people died just by trying to travel several miles through the Congo forest? But thousands or millions of farmers with pottery and iron technology and boats basically crossed those dangerous streams in Congo. Even the Congo River alone is one of the most dangerous rivers in the world. It's like 720 feet deep, and likely had many crocodiles the size of 3 lengths of a car. I mean, there was even like rumors of dinosaurs in those regions in those times. I'm not going to go into that. But basically, an immigrant from Nigerian regions basically migrated into those regions 2,000 years ago and basically crossed those rivers and those regions with those dangerous animals. So I just want to show you their hypothesis again. This guy basically said they went around from the Cameroon regions into Gabon. And if you notice, it doesn't basically elaborate on how they got into the Congo regions. It just specifies random migration routes, because that part there leading into this so-called Bantu Zone C region, I don't know how, it's beyond me how basically they are hypothesizing somebody got through those forests. And it's not just the Congo River itself, there's multiple rivers in that region. It's like if you look at it, from like a bird's eye view and you highlight all the rivers, it looks like the veins of a heart, like literally the veins of a heart, like all the streams. There's multiple rivers, lots and lots of rivers, and a lot of those rivers are dangerous. And when I say they're dangerous, they would basically be dangerous for people who are not traditionally hunter-gatherers. So people that are so-called agricultural farmers who are savannah based, how on earth they're basically going to survive crossing those regions, I would not know. How would they familiarize between the poisonous insects to the non-poisonous insects, the poisonous plants to the non-poisonous plants, the animals that would harm them to the animals that would not harm them? The humidity alone, how on earth are they adapting to those climates? So imagine people are basically walking through those areas and they're not even familiar with these areas, and they're not hunter-gatherers as well. Let's stick to the labels they granted us to demonize us. Bantu farmers, aka Bantu agriculturists. Have we forgotten that agriculture is associated with malaria? How did the so-called Bantu expand in numbers and absorb the environments? According to their own science and statistics, this prehistoric historical agricultural lifestyle that they assigned to us shows that there would have been actually a mass decline of so-called Bantu due to agricultural lifestyles in these dangerous areas, which would have harbored thousands of malaria outbreaks, enough to wipe out everyone attempting to migrate through these regions before the poisonous snakes and poisonous insects wiped them out. They label us agriculturalists to maintain their lie, yet malnutrition is a major factor in Congo, and they find reasons to distort statistics about this. How strange. Farmers who can't feed themselves. Have a think about that. Why do you think they would prefer to distort numbers of Congolese deaths or not report Congolese malnutrition statistics at all? Their own records make it abundantly clear we do not know how to farm on our own lands. So hold on, I thought we were the Bantu farming agriculturalists. Surely we can't be hunter-gatherers, because on TV and the mainstream science articles they said that hunter-gatherers are 150 centimeters tall. So who are we? Who is actually farming on our lands and carrying out surveys to identify lots of our lands is unused? Is it a coincidence that the same way they distort our numbers on malnutrition is the same way they distort our identity via modern DNA testing? After they wipe out all the so-called Bantu invaders, do they plan to then move in on our unused lands? Why do we have one of the highest deaths for malaria if we are not engaging in agriculture on a mass scale? According to their own scientific records, it's hunter-gatherers who do not have history of farming. So why all of a sudden we have forgotten our history of farming? Are we aware these scientists also locate genetic traits via disease? They also do this to sometimes identify genetic relations amongst African populations. So my question is, why didn't the Proto-Bantu regions carry sleeping sickness with them from Nigeria, Cameroon regions into Congo? Why is Congo the highest for sleeping sickness deaths but not Nigeria, Cameroon regions? Does these statistics look normal to you, or is this deliberate? Let's be clear, these scientists have basically said that this sleeping sickness disease basically has been in existence for thousands of years, and it gets carried along with the host. So why didn't it get carried along from Nigeria, Cameroon regions into Central Africa? Also, have you noticed some areas where sleeping sickness is mostly found in? Now let's check the timeline. This was in the mid-late 19th century. Those that have a good idea on our history will know many of our Central African Congos went to Liberia and Sierra Leone in the 19th century and dispersed into regions as far as Ivory Coast to the east and as far as Mali and Guinea to the west. Is it fair we also start making our own hypotheses to suggest this was spread from Congolese people, considering sleeping sickness seems to be indigenous to Congo? Also want to throw in there, why did a project get funded by $1 billion Rockefeller Institute to basically deal with this sleeping sickness in Congo? I will come to a close on this now, though I haven't exhausted all my findings. I'm saving other materials for other future videos I'll be doing for separate subjects. Key things I'm demonstrating in this 9-part video is the devils need to maintain the Bantu migration theory from Nigeria, as there are stereotypes and propaganda elements attached to it, which basically assist their long-term geopolitical agendas. This Bantu migration lie is also a key tool for the Europeans to enforce ethnic distortion tactics against us, which helps blur their involvement in causing a mass decline in so-called Bantu ethnic groups that you probably have never heard of. They will invest as much money and resources as they can and even publish fake scientific studies or archaeological finds and stop at no cost, so long as this Bantu migration lie is perceived as a fact. Even on the most basic level, there is no Proto-Bantu record in Nigeria or Cameroon, and this is a fact. If you are in doubt, even check on your own Wikipedia page and read the section I have highlighted, then ask yourself, why is there such great need to reinforce these migration theories from Nigeria? Thanks for listening, and in the future I'll be bringing different history and events relative to Congo that you very likely have not heard about.